Hello, and welcome to our third and final conversation with the composer for the Patrick Cassidy The Mass. We have 2 weeks ago, we spoke with some of the singers of Laude who were on the project. Last week, we spoke with Reverend Michael and Reverend Laura, and who are the spiritual leaders here at the church, about their experience in helping to create the project. And today, we have the coup de grace, Christoph Bull. The three of us have been working together so closely. Christoph, of course, our organist in residence here, if you are unfamiliar with our leadership. And yeah, it's just, sitting with the two of you always feels like old home week when it's just the three of us, because we've worked so much on this project since the beginning of this year. And I'm very excited to spend this time and hearing about the organ specifically and about y'all's experience in creating within this space. And so I thought maybe we'd just start out with chatting about how it came together. Somebody jump in. When did we first hear about it? What was your first impression? All those kinds of things.
So this project came to me from two different angles, completely different, West Coast and East Coast. My colleague at UCLA, the lawyer Don Franzen, emailed me and said, hey, would you check out this piece, The Mass by Patrick Cassidy? And I have a lot of respect for Don, so I took that very serious. So I checked it out, the existing recording by the London Symphony Orchestra. And I brought it to you, and we said, yeah, let's do that sometime.
That was back in 2019 or something.
That is correct, yes. And then my student and our organ scholar, Philip Hoke, was writing his dissertation, and he had to get in touch with the Philip Glass people. And he got to know Richard Guerin, who leads our record label, Supertrain Records. And then Philip came back to me and said, Christoph, we have this. Actually, he said Dr. Bull. He's very polite.
And now he's Dr. Hoke. We should.
Once he is a doctor, he can call me whatever he wants. But he's not quite there.
Oh, he's not there yet. Okay.
He's still
but
putting,
he is on the album, and that's exciting.
That's right. And he said there's this wonderful opportunity. So he was very enthusiastic about it because Richard had told him about it. So now that had come to me from two angles, and I went back to you and I said, David, now we really got to do it. And I called you actually on the phone first from my beautiful yard at the LA River, and you were your delightful self, and I thought, okay, we should do this. And then David and I visited you and your brother at your house, and this was still in the middle of COVID, so it was very special.
Remind me, actually, before I ask that question, I forgot to say, I'm David Harris, Director of Music and Arts at the church.
Yes, you are.
And this is Patrick Cassidy, if you're tuning in for the first time, the composer of this piece. Remind me, Christoph, that next conversation we had, because the first conversation we were leaning into looking, we both loved the score, we were trying to figure out where it might fit, we were looking at the great works on the Great Organs Concert.
Yes.
And then quarantine hit. So that was, and then it was a year before we met with Patrick at his house. I can't remember when, I think it was right around when we were recording the Vaughan Williams, which would have been the fall of 2020.
Yeah, it was
dead in the middle of quarantine, and
yes.
I think you said, I know it's quarantine, but look what we did with the Vaughan Williams,
yes.
which was to record one movement per week for services.
Exactly.
And then put it all together for a concert. You said, what if we could do that with this piece? I think that's where
that sounds about right.
Okay.
You know, the quarantine is a little bit of a blur.
I know.
Only I feel it was an extremely creative time. Obviously, there were challenges, but I really appreciate the fact that we were able to make something out of it, to make the best of it by recording and filming a lot. And so that was actually a better time to do it than the year before when I first heard about it.
Yeah.
And also, Lent was around the corner. And I think we felt, hey, this would be something good to stretch over Lent.
Right.
And then we built it up to Holy Thursday. And
so you must have spoken to, the two of you must have spoken in January or something, because we met you in January, correct?
Yes, I think Christoph first called me in January.
Okay.
About the project. And we chatted on the phone, and then after that, then you came to the house, and we had tea, Irish tea,
it was the
sandwiches.
Tea.
Yes.
And biscuits, there were biscuits too?
And biscuits. And
okay.
I knew who Christoph Bull was, your reputation had preceded you, and I was very excited to do something like this, and work so intimately with you with this magnificent instrument here. And yeah, so that's how that came about, yes.
So we moved quickly.
Well,
That's,
I was
now
gonna
that you
bring
say
that up,
that,
yeah.
we got together and it just felt right.
Well, in that day, I remember we showed up around 11, and we left around 3 or 4. And I knew walking in, I said to myself, I may have even said to you, I said, I know Irish people, and they're chill and they love to chat, and I know Christoph, and you're chill and you love to chat. I figured when the two of y'all got together, we were going to be there all day, and we were. It didn't feel like all day, though, because you're both so gifted at gab.
The gift of
But
gab.
do you
We were
remember?
lamenting the fact that we couldn't have a drink, a proper drink. Yeah, but then we did that later.
Is that because it was too early in the day?
It was
That's
early in the
why?
day, yes. And yeah, that day was just tea, yes.
Yeah, that was the
Unfortunately.
reason. If we
Yeah, I
had
think
stuck
we had
around a little bit longer.
3 or 4 pots of tea, I believe.
We did, yes. It was good. And I guess what Patrick was alluding to when we started recording, we were able to work together. I mean, very few people were in the sanctuary at that time, right? And that was the blessing of being the organist, that I was here during the whole quarantine. And I was actually here more often than before or after. I practically lived here. And it was kind of nice, I have to say, that we had the sanctuary to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's in the shot, but the console is over there, and there's an organist's throne, and Patrick was sitting in the throne, and I was going through the movement, pulling stops, and usually we got together the day before recording or 2 days before recording, and I was always waiting for you to say, no, that's wrong, or you would say, okay, here the trombones are coming in, or here the horns are coming in, or here it's all strings, or here the men are coming in. So that was very helpful to have the composer who knows the score so well sitting right next to me. It must be said, though, Patrick, that what I also really appreciated was how much leeway you were giving me. You were not breathing over my shoulder, even though you could have literally done that.
Yeah.
But you were hanging back and very sparse, and you actually told me that's your style.
Well, that's my style because I know when I work in a film score, I like a director who doesn't micromanage me.
Yes,
Because that's a disaster.
you were paying it forward.
Yeah, and of course, I would suggest to you, based on my orchestrations, ideas, but then I was always amazed by what you achieved with this instrument in terms of the drama.
Yes.
You know, in normal orchestration, you can create great drama with the timpani, percussion, bass, drum, etc. But you were able to create a huge, huge amount of dynamic drama with this instrument.
And you gave us license to do so. I think you told David and you told me, you said, hey, go for it, go for a wide dynamic range, which is noteworthy because sometimes in traditional repertoire, people like to, understate things, and we don't like to understate things.
And I really want to spend a good chunk of time exploring some of those timbral conversations.
Yes.
I just want to put an exclamation point on the timeline before we leave it, because you spoke in early January, we met in late January, because we had a virtual concert we put on in mid-January, so we met right after that when I had a little time to breathe. And our first recording went live in the February 21st service.
Yes.
Sanctus.
Amazing.
There was about a 3 or 4 week window during which this y'all's synergy started to settle and actually take form for the first time ever. You didn't know each other. 4 weeks later, we put on our first track. And you're talking about the trust that you felt and the trust that you felt. I mean, and the way that we so quickly got up to speed. I remember in that conversation, that first chat at your house with all the pots of tea, I asked in so many different ways, how do you want this to go? And I kept asking different ways because I just wanted to make sure, because I've worked with enough composers who you ask them more and they're, oh, yeah. And then you do it and they say, oh, no. But so I kept asking and you kept offering little pieces of information. And I think to what Christoph was saying about not feeling like you were breathing down our neck, but it wasn't like you were absent. You were very much a part of the vision. Will you speak a little bit to when you first talked to us, and then that idea of passing over your baby in such a short amount of time, in such a weird way?
I had heard the previous large work you had done during quarantine, which was Donna Novus Pacem by Vaughan Williams, and that was magnificent and beautiful.
Thank you.
So I knew this was a well-oiled machine in terms of doing a virtual recording, and I knew I had one of the world's greatest organists. So in large part, my work was already done. I was handing it over to you. And, you know, a piece of music is not alive when it's on a page. You have notes and you have dynamic markings, articulations, etc., but it's the interpretation of a piece that brings it to life. And I think this interpretation and performance is definitive. And I think when people are performing this piece in the future, they will come to this recording as a guidance for it.
And certainly the person writing the dissertation on you will take that statement and put it at the top of the chapter on the recordings. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. It's such a joy to hear those words and to, you know, that you don't have to say that, certainly. And
well, I think it's there for any music lover to hear. It's in the recording. It's evident.
And so this is actually, I haven't made this point yet in our conversations, but the piece that we recorded is a premiere because this is a new version of a piece that existed in another format for orchestra and choir. Can you take us through where you were? So the London Symphony Orchestra and the London Singers recorded it, no slouch of an ensemble, with the orchestra.
I heard of them.
And that was about 3 years before we got a hold of the work. So will you take us through the process of getting that beautiful recording with them and then thinking, oh, actually, this needs to be a different piece now, and what it was like to bring it into the organ world?
Well, actually, I received an email yesterday from somebody who heard the new recording, and they were confused because they said it's got the same number of movements and the same titles, but it sounds completely different. And they were wondering how that had happened. And actually, it does sound very different. And it's not something that I expected, but I think it certainly sounds more liturgical, more sacred, this new version. The other one maybe might sound more, well, I suppose it might sound a bit more symphonic, dramatic in a sense, but this one has a core, a spiritual core that the other one doesn't have. And, you know, it's not something I expected.
Like a lot of people might think, oh, you just dumbed it down so that nobody had to hire instruments, or you just did a score reduction, but you actually labored over it as a choral organ piece.
Yeah, I put a lot of work into this new version, the choir organ version, and while I was doing it, I knew it was going to work. I had a very, very strong feeling that it was going to work well, and I didn't expect it to work quite this well.
Well, there is a practicality issue, of course, that you were alluding to. Although organists should be paid very well, because it's a lot of work to get good, and it's a lot of work to prepare something, but it's less people than a symphony orchestra, so that makes sense. Yesterday we did some pieces from the Fauré Requiem, and Fauré approved 3 different versions with 3 different sizes of forces himself. And then, of course, after the fact, I hate to break this to you, but once composers are dead, then people do all kinds of stuff to their music.
Yeah.
But Fauré himself approved that, different versions. Bach did that to some of his works. So it makes a lot of sense. But to me, it's like MTV Unplugged, right? Now it's like to the bones, to the core. And I think the organ and choir version does that.
And you know, having a big orchestra can disguise a lot. You know, if it's not a great piece, it still sounds lovely because you've got this lush, huge orchestra. But when you're down to the bare bones, everything has to work.
Yes. And then again, it was really well suited for that particular period in time. First of all, the music. It's healing and comforting. And when we do our live concert on February 5th, the idea is that it will give people a lot of comfort. COVID won't be over, unfortunately, in February, but hopefully we're over the worst, right? So we're going to celebrate that and that comfort. So the music has that. But it also worked, again, logistically, because we could do the organ parts first, and we could really crank the organ, make it sound as full as we wanted to, because we knew later we can blend it in. Now, funnily enough, now that we're doing it live, we're still cranking the organ.
That's right, because it feels good.
and that's partially a testament of David, because like you, he also gives leeway. You know, when I grew up, you know, being a piano accompanist or organ accompanist, there was a lot of suppression. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. It's like, okay, you stay low, and here's the soloist, and there'd be a big gap between the instrument and the singers. And that way, you're losing emotional impact. You're losing it. Yeah. It should, of course, the organ should not drown out the singers, but it should be supportive, and it needs to be supportive. It needs to be close. And when I came to UCLA, they called the piano class collaborative. They didn't say accompanying, and I liked that. And that's what it is. It's a collaboration.
And I think you're speaking to something we've all said in our own way, the trust element, the acknowledgement that we are all co-equal artists and have a role to play here. And that's something that I've enjoyed exploring with the two of you, and with Mark Doughton, who couldn't be here, but he was our mastering engineer. We'll talk about that in a minute. But everything you're saying, you've said those words a million times, it seems like, over the last 6 months.
I appreciate it. No, I've got a little bit of the PTSD from the old days. Like you on the side, and even on the stage sometimes, the pianist gets like pushed into the shadows, literally speaking, you know. Yeah. And the other day I was listening to a YouTube performance of Mahler's Second Symphony, The Resurrection, and there's a big moment at the end with the organ, and that YouTube thing is like, there's an organ. They could have used a Casio keyboard for what they were doing. Yeah. And so when I did that at Royce Hall with Anthony Parnser, who is a like-minded conductor, he said, crank it, give me everything. Yes. And that's what we did here too.
And there's nuance to that, and I'd like to get into some of these orchestration thoughts, but you mentioned the Fauré yesterday. We performed 2 movements of Patrick's piece and 2 movements from the Fauré Requiem. It was a remembrance for All Saints' Day, and they all fit really well together. In rehearsal on Thursday, the registration you had chosen, which was beautiful, was also crowding out the singer's ability to hear themselves. So I just walked up to you and I said, can we redistribute the registration? And then I said, do you want to take time now, or do you just want to do it? And you said, I'll figure it out before Sunday. And you did. I don't know exactly what you did, but what I heard was the singers had more room to hear, and the strings were still full in the room.
Well, I did 2 things, and one of the things, and you obviously know that's why you said that to me, can you put the strings and that roundness positive, could be thickness, if it's too much, that would be the negative version of that, but you still wanted the roundness, and I wanted that too, so we put that more in the room, and here on the chancel, a more precise tone. But what I also did, and I think you liked that, and you liked that in general, I added some higher overtones.
Always love that.
And you love that, and it's not my natural go-to, because I kind of like the mellow, but I can definitely see how sometimes adding the overtones, and that's what a pipe organ does. You manipulate the overtone series. Yeah. So adding the overtones helped the singers. And so that can be very helpful for a conductor to say, hey, can we have more of that sparkle?
And that played a huge role in our mixing, which maybe we'll get to in a minute, but the way the singers excite the harmonic series is unique to the human voice. The organ excites the harmonic series in a very calculated way, as you mentioned, by adding pipes, adding stops. And part of our mixing process was to figure out how to let the voices be voices and the organ be organ, but also from a recording recorded in 16 different rooms, make it sound like it was in the same place. And so when we're live, I want more of those upper harmonics because it excites the ear and helps the singer sing more into that part of their voice. When we actually recorded, we had to choose who got what, which was interesting. But.
Exactly, and in the mix, of course, again, you want both. You want the roundness and the power, but not muddiness or thickness. And you want clarity, but you don't want it to sound thin, right? Exactly. So it's navigating that. And then, of course, I think with this project, we also decided, because it's a tradition, in a way it's a traditional work, it's a mass, right? It's not an experimental, Stockhausen thing, so we also went for a natural sound. But I find that fascinating. Last night, I stayed up a little bit too long. The reason was that I watched 3-2-1, Paul McCartney on Hulu with Rick Rubin. I'm a big McCartney guy, who, by the way, has some similar roots as you, because I think they call Liverpool the Irish version like in the UK. I know it's a little bit of a touchy thing with the Irish and the UK, but McCartney apparently has some Irish, and I think you can hear it with you and him, with the melody, with the sense of melody. That's an Irish thing.
Yes.
Anyway, McCartney was talking about Nowhere Man, how Harrison did the guitar sound, and they made it very bright with EQ, and it reminded me of our process, how we went through that. And it wasn't always easy, right? And sometimes it was going back and forth, trying different things. And I'm glad that we took time with this.
I know that you're a big Beatles fan, and but I believe three of them, McCartney, Lennon, and Harrison, they all have Irish heritage.
Yeah.
Okay.
The odd one out is Ringo Starr. Yeah.
So there needed to be one non-Irish guy for balance.
Otherwise,
right?
they would have been you too.
So the Irish wouldn't get out of control. I can totally see that.
Yeah.
So Patrick, we mentioned it came from your first version of this was orchestral. One of the things that I do a summer festival for composers and singers to come and explore the voice through voice science and explore composition through different things the voice can do and this kind of thing. And we have an organist on faculty for that. It's called the Neo Festival, if anybody wants to come. And
yeah, come.
In the Neo Festival, there's always a couple sessions on how to write for the organ. And one of the most challenging things I've noticed for composers is that it looks like a piano score, but it's the organ. And so there's all these sounds, and they're like, well, how do I ask for, A, how do I know what the sounds are? And B, how do I ask for them? And so as you're taking this orchestral score and not translating it into the organ, but actually creating a new organ part, this is part one of the question. What was that like? Like looking at it and saying, okay, this thought, that thought. And part two is, you had the gift of sitting over the organist's shoulder. So what was it like to, as Christoph said, to remember, oh yeah, the trombones are here, whatever. Just that whole creating the organ part with the orchestra in your ear. What was that process like for you?
Well, I think arranging the orchestra for organ, first of all, I had to make sure that I could get all the voices and make them as independent as possible. And of course,
the instrumental voices.
Yes, the instrumental voices, yes. And, you know, of course, with the organ, you have the pedals, which is one voice, and you have the two manuals. And I just followed that throughout. You know, because even in a four-part fugue, it's very rare that the four voices will be there together all the time. So that worked quite well. And then in terms of the orchestration, I just put in dynamics.
Okay.
But stepwise dynamics, which is much more suitable for the organ. And I think I've got the odd hairpin as well, you know, but sparingly. And sometimes when we were actually recording it, we actually put in new crescendos, diminuendos, etc., because you said it was possible to do it.
Well, the great organs at First Church, it's a modern organ, even though it was first started in the 30s, but we've modernized it, and you can do crescendos very well, so it's suited for that. With an old Baroque-style organ, you couldn't do the smooth crescendos. It would have to be terrace dynamics, but I think that's one of the reasons this instrument was well suited for the work.
And Christoph, since you're talking about it, will you take us through just a little bit about what makes this organ unique and your thought process when you see a score like this and how you start to hear it, quote unquote, orchestrated on the instrument?
Yes. So that's, you know, that's half of the art as an organist, to orchestrate. You know, we call it registering, which means you pick the registers or the stops. A lot of music doesn't have specific instructions from the composer, and neither did yours, which I love. Same is true for Bach. He gives you the notes and that's it, do something, right? There's some French composers. Apparently the French are a little bit more controlling than one would think.
Really?
And in organ music, some of the French composers give very specific instructions. For example, Olivier Messiaen, very specific, which is good too, because it's good when the composer knows what they're doing, which Messiaen certainly did. Anyway, we sit down and we orchestrate. Unique about this instrument, first of all, it's an instrument that's a living, pun intended, organism. It got started in the early 30s when this space was built, and the pipes where we're sitting, right above us, the chancel pipes, that was the original organ. And it kind of stayed in the chancel. And later, you know, the stewards of this church figured the organ really needs to come out into the room. So they added pipes in the West Gallery. And that was very helpful. And then later in the 90s, they thought, well, we've got 2 more balconies, north and south. Why not put pipes on there too? All of that was helpful and useful. There might have been a little bit competitiveness also with other places. I think they had a little bit of a thing with the Crystal Cathedral going, like a little race for the number of pipes, and now we got over 18,000. So we did good.
The Olympics.
The Olympics of pipes.
Yes.
But beyond that, it's really helpful. Because what it is, it's surround sound. It's immersive. So if you're sitting in row 10, which you usually do, right? You're immersed by sound coming from the sides, from the front, from behind. Doesn't have to be. You can, as the organist, you decide where the sound is. But with something like this, we usually decided let's go for the surround sound. We did a stereo mix, but in theory, we could go back and do the surround version too. We've talked about that.
Yes.
And this organ is great for that purpose. Better than any other I've ever seen.
Oh, nice.
There's other locations where they have several organs, but this one integrates very well.
And you know, you're talking about all the uniquenesses there. To me, this is a Los Angeles, if not a U.S. treasure.
Yes.
This organ.
Let's call it a world treasure.
A world treasure, yeah. There are just so few like it. And
Yes.
speak, if you can, put it in some context. I know it's always touchy about the biggest whatever, but
Yeah.
in context of other organs in the world that are notable, how does this one stand out?
Yeah, so let's start with size. Size may or may not matter. It matters somewhat in that you can make a real joyful noise, so you can really crank it here. And I would be lying if I said that doesn't matter. That's
Feels
awesome.
so good when
right?
you open it up.
It feels good. And we have to do it at least once each Sunday, right, to really crank that thing. I think it's at this point the 4th largest. You know, there is an organ at a department store, the Macy's in Philadelphia, the Wanamaker organ. And then there is one at the Atlantic City Boardwalk. And there's also a very large organ at the West Point Cadet Chapel. And I think then it's us.
And
so
are all of their pipes working?
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
Atlantic City, they're still working on it, and I'm not completely up to date on West Point. I think they had some issues, but it's big.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the Death Star. We did Star Wars here too, you know, and this thing is fully operational. We've got great organ techs, always had, and they're doing a great job. They come in at least once a week, if not twice, and almost everything we have here works.
Which is unique, I think, too, in the organ world. Often really beautiful instruments get short shrift and become less and less valuable.
Talk to organists, and 10 out of 10, somebody will tell you some sad story about them playing a beautiful instrument that got neglected.
Yeah.
They do need TLC. Organs need attention. You can't just let them sit there. You know, there are certain processes like re-leathering. Of course, there's tuning.
Yeah.
It's really like 18,000 oboes, flutes, trumpets that we have here, you know. So I'm very grateful that this church is dedicated and remains dedicated to the instrument.
So, size, what other things make it unique?
So now I think beauty, you know. The instrument was started by the E.M. Skinner Company from Boston in the early 30s, and they made very beautiful organs, and they were the premier maker at the time. Very orchestral. That's why we have an English horn sound. Then this organ has a lot of string sounds, which I love as a European. Sometimes people ask me, why are you here? They've got so many beautiful organs in Europe. Yeah, but most of them do not have a string sections like this. This is something typical for some American organs. They have a very strong string section, as do some of those other organs I mentioned a little bit earlier. And so we got a very powerful string section. And then, of course, what we also have is the continuation in '69 when the West Gallery organ was built by the Hermann Schlicker Organ Company. And that instrument was a little bit more in the neo-Baroque style, which is different from the American classic style of the 30s, but they integrate well, which also has to do with the space. And I think it blends well. Yeah.
And you've mentioned strings, oboes, English horns, trumpets. In concept, in construction, each of those 18,000 pipes is a metal pipe. There's some wooden ones. And and it's got wind blowing through it. So
Yes.
functionally speaking, they're all pretty much the same thing. How is it that they can create the image of strings, oboes, English horns, trumpets?
Yeah, that's a
flutes?
good question. This would be like another conversation, and at that point I would bring in an organ builder who could really get into details. It has a lot to do with the pipes, you know, the way they're built, the way they're measured, you know, the materials. So it has a lot to do that.
The opening where the wind blows through.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely. So it's a very highly developed craft, and there's not that many people. I mean, there's enough to keep the art and craft going, but it's a quite specialized art and craft that I have a lot of respect for.
So
And
go ahead.
and I should add, it's not only like a little orchestra. There's also sounds that are only found in an organ. You know, like principals and octaves. And mixtures, which is a lot of high sparkle. So it's more than just an orchestra, but this particular instrument is quite orchestral in character, yes.
Yeah, and blending all that again is what makes an organist, to me, spectacular like yourself. It's not just that you play with your hands and feet, but it's that your ears guide you into these creative solutions for scores, and that you're flexible. I marvel in rehearsal when I say, hey, Christoph, we need more of this, that, and you go, give me a second. Okay. It's so quick and you're so flexible, and that just says a lot about you as an artist and your knowledge of the instrument.
Yes. It also is a function of me having been here for 8 years, because I mean, I was already familiar before starting in 2013 with the instrument from concertizing here, but it really takes a while to really get comfortable with the instrument, to really know where it is. You know, the left hand. I would love to do a Jedi mind trick, but I'm not there yet. We're still working on it.
So all that being said, Patrick, you walk into this space with this new score that you've written for the organ that you know will functionally work, and you've got this orchestral sound in your head. What was it like when you first, in that month of February, when you and Christoph first started rehearsing together? How did you awaken to this space and this organ?
Well, I remember each of the 16 pieces were recorded using the same process. I would come in with Christoph towards the beginning of the week. We would go through the orchestration, discuss it, and I was always kind of flabbergasted by what you could produce in terms of matching the orchestra or even surpassing it. And I remember one time you even said to me, I wish I had a fifth limb so
Yes.
we could do even more. But,
It's a Jedi thing. That's what I'm working on. Let's talk again in 10 years. Let's see what I can come up with.
we'll see, yes.
Yes.
And when I heard the first piece we recorded was the Sanctus. And the first time I heard it with the choir, obviously, because I'd been here with Christoph and he put down the organ part. The first time I heard that on the church service online, I was amazed by how beautiful it was. And Elizabeth Anderson sung that piece beautifully. And when I heard that, I knew we had an album, and a great album.
So that was one of the questions I was going to ask. I will note that Sanctus track is still charting on the Apple Sacred Sounds charts. It's still up there in the top 10, and it came out at #1. And we're going to perform it this Sunday live with Elizabeth, and very excited to hear that on its feet in a live setting. But following that train of thought about the album, so you're sitting here in February. What we knew is that we were going to record a track per week. We had said in that Tea and Biscuits, hey, what if it just became an album? What if we actually got that far with it? Because Richard Guerin, who ended up representing us as our label with Supertrain, is a friend, and he was one of the reasons we knew about the piece. So that was out there. What if it could be a recording? But we also knew our limitations. It was quarantine. We had all these rooms, whatever. You said you heard that first track and it was sold. You knew we had an album out. What was that like, that moment of, oh, this is bigger than we thought?
Well, I actually remember that you guys, you and your wife Laurel, sent us a text because we had done the organ part, and then you probably were the first people to lay vocals on them. And you texted us as you were doing it. You said, "Oh my God, this is so healing." So that was an indicator what this piece can do. Now, I have to admit, I always was hoping that we could turn this into an album because I think about albums a lot. I love making albums. I love to be able to share with people who are not here. You know, one of my main target audiences is my mom in Germany, who's watching right now. Hi, Mom.
And hi, can I say hi to my mom too?
Absolutely.
Watching in Ireland.
Right? Hi to our moms, the best ever.
My mom is watching in Florida, so we're moms are covering the world.
So that's one of the reasons I love making records, where you can say, hey, here, listen. You know, of course, it's never quite the same as being in the room, but I think we got pretty darn close with this one to really capture the space.
Yeah, so y'all were on board with the album idea quickly. I was floating in the space with the weekly recordings and with getting the choir up to speed, and I knew it was very special. I still hadn't quite mapped how we were going to get to album, so I was just enjoying the process. And like you said, singing those vocal lines was quite healing, and exploring the piece as the music director, who is also making all of the guide tracks for the singers. I spent so much time with each track just getting to love the piece and loving what y'all had created in your recording. I mean, that you went first, as you said, Christoph. You didn't have the benefit of the voices to guide you, which I know is, in a live experience, we hear each other and we lean on each other. Like the Laudamus Te we sang yesterday, which is primarily a soprano solo that Laurel sang, moved different simply because we were in the room together yesterday. It's beautiful on the album. I'm not taking anything away from it, but we missed that when we were creating. What was it like for y'all to be in here and under that pressure cooker, figuring each other out, learning the space and the organ as we talked about with the orchestration, and then also to have to bring what was the platform for the artistry? I mean, that...
Well, I think there still was a feedback loop because of the process, right? You said one movement a week, so we do this, and then we hear what's coming back. So we did hear what you guys were doing with a delay, right? But there's, of course, a lot of trust. We knew that you guys would bring it, because that's what you do. That's what we do here. Bring it all the time. And of course, it's worth noting, we went through that process, and I think you said February 21st was the first service, and then we went all the way through May, right?
May 23rd.
And then the core team got together again, and we spent another 3 months on going through all of it again, going the extra miles, polishing it. The three of us, and also Mark Doughton, I think was the fourth person on that. So he really deserves a lot of credit as well.
He did an incredible job.
Yes, but that was the extra mile, and not to say, okay, this is already good enough. That's the good enough. That sometimes it needs to be said, but sometimes that's. I don't believe in the devil, but the artistic devil is
good enough.
Good enough. And I don't like leaving money on the table. If I know deep in my heart this can still be better, then let's keep pushing.
But you know, what we did in post-production was great and was necessary, especially because each of the singers was recorded in isolation. And, you know, creating an ensemble out of that took a little magic and fairy dust. And Mark provided that in the master, in the mixing and the mastering, etc. But one of the things that surprised me on the project was there were certain pieces that were, you know, reasonably difficult, like the Kyrie. And it's not difficult, but it's difficult to sing it beautifully. And it requires the singers to respond to each other in a sense. And I was really surprised by how well that piece worked. Considering how we were forced to record it. It was quite amazing.
Well, no, and you mentioned all the nipping and tucking of the singers. And I should say, Mark gets credit for his profound understanding of of mastering and just the patience. He also gets credit for working with the three of us sitting around him saying, know this, know this, know this.
Three strong people with individual tastes, yes.
And I think part of what made that work was that at times one of us got most of his attention and then would pass.
It would shift, but in good ways.
In good ways. It was
I sneaked in a couple of times when you guys weren't around as well.
Right, because you couldn't get a word in edgewise when we were.
That's right, but that's like a sports team, right?
Yeah.
You know, at some points in the game, this person becomes the playmaker, and at some point we all played that role.
To go back to that trust idea,
But I also think we all felt that in August, after half a year of working it, and I think that's a good amount for a record. Again, the Beatles, they spent half a year on Sgt. Pepper, which was unheard of at the time, and they did that at Abbey Road Studios. We did it at various home studios and here in the church, but with today's technology, you can do a lot.
Yes.
And I think then in August we felt, hey, we really gave it a lot, and yeah, we could still tinker with it, you know, remove that little ambient noise, and we said, no, now it's done.
Yeah. To go back a little to feed back into our process. So all during February and March, or May, February to May, y'all did your recording, sent it to us, singers did their recordings, and then I mixed them together so that they were rhythmically pitch aligned. We did some of the automation so that they all stuck together in phrases and stuff like that. And then Mark mastered it. That all happened in one day. I got the recordings on Tuesday, mixed it on Wednesday morning, he mastered it Wednesday afternoon, y'all heard it Wednesday night, then it was in.
Yes.
So that was a rapid pace.
Yes.
Come early June, we started unpacking that, finding out where maybe in that speed we missed some stuff, went back and refined it a little. And then we still had this question of, we've got 16 voices recorded on close mic, and then we have this organ recorded in this room. And the first time we got together in early June, the question was, what is the organ going to sound like? Because all through those 3 months, we weren't satisfied with how they were integrating. And to me, that's one of the magical moments of this project, was when we finally started to figure out how we could make it feel like the singers were in the room. And to the success of that, I sent it to my brother, who is also a professional choral conductor and a doctor, the two Dr. Harrises in the family.
And a great guy.
And a great guy. And he said, was this recorded live? Or
that's nice.
In virtual? And he knew it was recorded virtual because he had seen it, but he even knowing what he knew, when he heard it, he wasn't sure. So that told me we were successful. But do y'all remember that it was at your house, and we stood there, nobody wanted coffee that day. We did have some tea, but we didn't have
we stuck with
pots.
the tea, keep it pure.
I think it was 3 hours of how do we want the organ to sound. And we had long, involved conversations. Do y'all remember that, just what it felt like to have to chew on that?
I do, and it's a complicated issue, you know, because we had 3 positions for the organ right here in the front, and then what I call the sweet spot around row 10, where you kind of hear all of the pipes in a nice blend, and then closer to the West Gallery organ. And now you can do various things. You can all put them on top of each other, blend them, or you can blend them specifically in sections. And we went for a less is more approach, where we really mostly used the sweet spot, you know, the stereo mix. Now, when we go back to the surround mix, then we can think about the other positions again.
But you were really, from the beginning, you were dedicated to that approach. And from the beginning, Patrick, you were dedicated to finding a reverb that would blend them. And I was dedicated to EQing it and balancing the 3 mics so that I was thinking about it more like orchestrating the stops. And in the end, your approach won. Why were you so dedicated to, and I think it was the correct approach, but what were you hearing?
Yeah, just to be clear, I was not against your approach. It was mostly, in all honesty, because I knew the church loves us, but they're not going to pay us unlimited amount to make this record. And then they, you know, which is mostly with the engineer, right? If I may share that, who works hourly. So I knew they're not gonna.
We don't have that much time to do all that work,
and the more intricate approach really would have taken a lot of time, which I didn't think we had. But even in situations where I had the time, sometimes I just go for that. When I recorded First and Grand at the Disney Hall, we did the same thing. We had 5 positions, And we did the same thing. We settled on one of them. You know, it's just because it's so much information that it just seemed, let's keep it simple and let's do a less is more. But that doesn't mean we couldn't go back.
Correct. And well, and in the end, we did some reverb and we did some EQ, but the position, the choosing that mic was important. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I didn't say anything. I was listening. Yes.
Yeah, and in fact, it was. I'll share this in case anybody's watching, but we actually didn't use the reverb of the room. We used the reverb of a slightly larger room. I think it was sampled in Notre Dame, actually, in Paris, because we needed something that could envelop the voices a little more. Of course, it was recorded in the room, but we just added a little space to it. And so
we put the individual singers back into a church.
Correct.
Effectively, because the closet or the apartment bedroom where they were recording would have a very small reverb.
Right.
And it has to marry with the organ, which is in this massive building. And we found a solution that worked, yes.
And we had to do that to blend it before the purists get a coronary. You know, obviously because it was recorded in different spaces. There needed to be some device to blend it. And again, it's a record. The record is not the live performance. Whatever works on a record makes it sound better, works. What makes it worse doesn't work. And it's that simple.
And I would say, you know, I'm a big fan of avoiding judgment language. So better and worse are subjective terms. But I would say from the beginning we agreed that we're not trying to replicate a live performance, that we are creating a recording, and there are answers to that work for this project. But the finite elements of listening and of listening to so many inputs takes time. And when we were done with the session, you might walk away and 2 hours later listen to it and say, what were we thinking? Which happened often. In fact, right there at the end, Mark changed the compressor. I don't know if y'all remember this, but we had been working with one sort of compression, and the whole time you had been saying, I don't know about the compressor, there are these reasons. So at the very end, he switched to a lighter compression, and all of a sudden, this like 8 to 10,000 hertz just jumped out at me, and we were about done. And I said, Mark, I can almost be okay with this, but I don't think I can. So he and I actually sat down again. This is one of the times I was alone with him, and had to figure it out. And it's those little finite things, one little switch makes a big difference. That was our process for 2 or 3 months of again, like you said, not necessarily better or worse, but it's very different, and we have to decide whether that difference is something we value.
And that's right, and there is certainly different ways of doing it, and some of it is taste, you know? Let's go back to the Beatles. You remember George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, where Phil Spector threw all of that reverb on there, and it became a huge hit recording, but Harrison didn't really like that. But all of his musicians did, Clapton and all the other people who were there, and they prevailed. I think Harrison was right. They should have, but who am I? It was a #1 album.
You were always like the George Harrison of the group, weren't you? Yes.
But if I had been there, that's what I would have said. But in our case, yes, we needed to use tricks of the trade, but we also wanted to have a natural sound, right? Not exactly like being here, but a representation. So I think in the end, it was a success. We used the right amount of effects.
But you know, when I'm working on a project, usually if I'm working on a film score, I usually don't try anything new. I just stick with what works because there isn't time. But in this project, we didn't have any choice because we had to reinvent the wheel in a sense because nobody had recorded an album virtually before, an album of this complexity in terms of the number of singers, etc. So, so that process was necessary, and I'm quite pleased with the result, I have to say. It's amazing.
The whole process was so illuminating and exciting. I really think I would do this kind of project again with the one on a mic and then mixing it. I know it takes a little longer, but the nuance that we were able to garner in post was massive. And part of why it took so long is because we had so many options available to us.
Yeah, and I was happy too. And in the words of George Costanza, I'm never happy. The best it gets with me is happy adjacent. But I am happy with this one.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah, I was thinking, I love the other recordings I've done in my life. I've done probably 12 albums or so. But I only listen to them every now and again. this one I've listened to so much, and every time I listen to it, I want to listen to it again. It just, some real magic happened here. We're running out of time, so Patrick, I wonder if you'd just tell us a little bit. You dedicated the work to your father. Last week you talked about his passing in 1998 and that you started thinking about this project even before he died. Will you talk a little bit more about his influence on your setting of this piece?
Yes, well, my father was very religious, and but he also loved music, and his profession was pharmacy. He had a pharmacy shop, and but he also played the violin an awful lot in his spare time. He was also a philanthropist and involved in many, many charities. So I decided I should dedicate a mass to him, and that's how this project came about. And actually, listening to you talk during the service yesterday about your own family and how music was such an important part in your family when you were growing up, it reminded me of my own upbringing. And I know that Christoph, your father, also was an amateur musician like my father.
He played the sailor's piano, the Schifferklavier, which is the accordion.
And I guess we all inherit our parents' dreams and ambitions in life.
And same thing with my dad, also giving me a lot of my devotion to spirituality and religion. You know, sometimes religion gets a bad rap. I see religion as being devoted to God, to finding God, to searching. I'm not claiming to have the answers, but that process, and people are doing it from different angles. And your work, the Mass, is the universal angle. Of course, it's associated with the Catholic Church, but I think in music it transcends that. A Buddhist or Muslim or atheist person, I think we can say that our record company executive would probably identify with the latter. He likes it. It speaks to him. But I do have a question for you. When did you lose your father? What year?
My father passed away in 98.
98, yes.
It was actually his anniversary when we had the first of these conversations, and my mother was watching.
Ah, I didn't know that. I wish we had known that day. Yeah. How about that? And did you had mentioned he was also a tenor, correct?
Yes, he was also a very good singer and a beautiful tenor voice.
And the tenor solos show up regularly throughout the Mass. Was that a part?
I had to give a good part for the tenor, yes.
So you can hear your father singing every time it goes on.
Well, you know, he sung in the church choir at home, and that's what he loved to do. I mean, he was always involved in something. It was either philanthropy, music, or else just the normal work he had to do to make a living.
Yeah, I lost my dad in 2010, and he gave me that love for churches. I've never entered a church where I didn't feel there was something there, the spirit. And in our little home suburb, my dad would take me to the Catholic Church, even though we were Lutherans. But the Catholic Church was open all the time, which is one of the reasons they're still around. If you're open all the time, you win. So we went to the Catholic Church, and he had that respect for the space. And sometimes we'd go on vacation, we'd be on the Autobahn, and he'd spot a church on the side, he'd take the exit, we'd go to the church. It became annoying to us kids at times, but now I love that. I love churches, and I love different traditions.
So one of the things that I value most about this recording is kind of silly. Every time the timpani shows up. It's so rare to have a timpani on an organ, and it's just so exciting when it's there. It just excites me so much. Those, to broaden that a little, each moment that is so exciting in this piece, in the recording, that leap out at you, and you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. What do you value most about this?
In the original piece, I had these parts where you would have fanfare, trumpets, and timpani and highlights. And so I told Christoph the spots where these existed on the original score, and Christoph did it his way. And I love your fanfare trumpets.
Well, that was, and yeah, that's one of the special sounds we have. We have horizontal trumpets. Sometimes they're called Spanish trumpets, but they're powerful, and we have an array of them. Another great thing about this organ, and most sounds, there's different versions of it. So if you say this is too bright or this is too mellow, there's another one that'll do the trick. But this is definitely one of the reasons why it was great to have you around, because you didn't write those timpani and fanfare trumpets into the score, into the organ score, but you told me, and you had your orchestral score, and then I just marked it, you know, with some sparse notation, and we added them, we multi-tracked them.
Yeah, that's a really important note about the collaboration, is the little pieces that came up that turned out to be some of the most exciting moments, yeah.
And if it's the composer, you can do it. You got the approval, right? You didn't just do it. I mean, it's not like we never do stuff anyway, but it's with authority.
Right.
It's not sacrilegious.
So what other things do y'all really value about the recording itself?
I value the recording. I think we've created something that is beautiful and spiritual, and I think it is something that might be bigger than even us here in First Church. This Mass will now always be associated with First Church, but I think I expect that it will be performed in other places. Of course, we will do a tour with Laude and with Christoph, but I do hope that other churches take on this piece, especially the Catholic Church.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, that was, you kind of answered two questions at once, but the opportunity to do it here means that other people will have the opportunity to hear it and love it, and I agree. That's something I deeply value as well.
Yes.
And I concur with that, you know, giving the work longevity, being able to share it. You know, one time I had the opportunity to work with James Conlon at the Disney Hall on Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, and he had dug up a recording of Britten leading a rehearsal, and that was a resource. I think our album could be a resource for people 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and I love that. And the second thing I value is the collaboration, the collaboration with you fine gentlemen, with the engineers and the singers. Not always in the same room. And collaboration is not always easy, right? Especially if you have people with visions and personalities, but we made it, and we still talk to each other.
And it's amazing. It's amazing what a German, an Irishman,
and an Alabamian
can do when we get together and cooperate.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, we have different ways of approaching our artistry, but we also, I think, all recognize we like know our own tells, and so we're able to say, so this is where I am right now, but I'm, you know, or just back out and let somebody else be in charge for a minute.
Well, and just to be clear, we agreed a vast majority of the time, but sometimes you gotta be okay with butting heads or whatever you call it. And I mean, look at the great bands. Again, the Beatles. I mean, Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. Those people sometimes they're at each other's throats, and then you get past it, and the end result is great. And it's nice when most of it is easy cruising, but if some of it is not, that's okay. You got to be okay with that as an artist.
Yeah, and again to say, we were never at each other's throats.
That's right.
Even once, which is also a beautiful thing.
I'm still working on the non-confrontational language. It's a work in process. I'm learning.
Well, so what do you hope people will receive when they listen to this album, which is, by the way, out today for the first time fully? What do you hope that they'll receive as they listen?
Well, again, I would say that the comfort, the healing, the universality, you know, connecting to other people, having this vehicle, that's what comes to mind first.
Yeah. Well, you spoke about the basic philosophy of religion and to the idea of contemplating who we are, where we come from. I would hope that the Mass allows people to contemplate and meditate about things like that.
Yeah, I hear both of those, and the idea of giving them an opportunity, a space to ask some questions, to expand, to feel more connected to themselves and to others. And
stepping away from the grind. We should say that. I mean, when you listen to the album, and please do, people, listen to this. Don't just listen to us, listen to the music. You know, you take very slow tempos. It's like being out of time. It's a glimpse of the eternal. So it's a great vehicle to step away from everyday worries and everyday lives for an hour. You know?
I like that statement, Christoph. The spaciousness of this piece is a glimpse of the eternal because of the way it stretches. And yet the melodic qualities and the singableness of it feels very present. So you get this sense of time that exists on multiple planes within this work. And that's one of the reasons I'm super excited to hear it live as a full work, which will happen on February 5th in the evening, right here. That's a Saturday.
Yes.
And people who are in LA or who want to come to LA and are listening, we're hoping to put together a mass choir of other LA singers who will help us premiere the work. We're working on that now, reaching out to people. So if you know someone who'd like to join us, we have a spot for you. Because we want that night to be a moment of healing, of sharing, of commemoration that's more than just us. We really want to bring community into this space because this work is so powerful. What are y'all looking forward to most about that live premiere?
Exactly what you just said. I mean, being able to share it with live people, both in the audience and performing. And yeah, we love records, but there is something about this space, of course, coming together as a community. And I think for us, that will be the first big concert. I mean, we're back in person for our weekly services. We should plug that too.
Well, we do have the MLK concert on January 9th.
Oh, that is true. So it's going to be the second one.
It'll be the second big thing for us, yes.
And that's great. So I think you said that earlier. First Church is a LA treasure. And then I said it's a world treasure, but we're in LA, so it's an LA treasure. Not everybody knows it. These will be opportunities to come and experience this incredible space.
And not everybody knows that you play a free concert every Sunday morning at 10:30, which is also an LA treasure that I think everybody traveling to the city ought to take up because it's always brilliant. But Patrick, you were going to say something.
Yes, I was just going to say that by the time we do this concert, I'm hoping that we're even more open up in terms of people feeling happy about being in a public building. And I think because of the nature of the piece also, I know that we all feel that this concert should be a celebration of the end of this pandemic.
Yeah.
And that was always the idea. So we probably won't be able to say it's the end, no more of the treacherous virus, but over the hump, I think.
Yes.
I mean, after this, I'm going to take my 8-year-old to get vaccinated. So I think we've made some progress as a society.
Yes.
Well, we're kind of on the edge of time, but I'm going to lay down a few logistics for people so they know what to look forward to. And while I'm doing that, think about, you've mentioned touring, you've mentioned people listening to it. What are some other dreams you have for the piece in the future? So think about that for a second. And I'll say, the album is out, it's live, you can buy it in its fullness today through multiple streaming platforms, and you can get the disc itself if you want a hard copy through multiple online platforms, or by coming here next Sunday, we'll have copies available. And you can get all of that information on how to find it on fccla.org/the-mass-album. And we do hope that you'll take us up on that and listen. There are 4 YouTube videos out currently. The other 12 will be released next Monday, so there's one more week before you get all the YouTubes, but you can watch 4 of them right now. And next Sunday is our CD release party, which will happen right after our service. So come and enjoy that with us. Patrick and Christoph and myself will be here. Laude will be here if you want people to sign the album, say something nice to you. We're happy to do that. We'll have our Sharpies on hand. So come for that, enjoy that with us. And then certainly February 5th, we hope to see everyone here in this space for the live premiere. And thank you all of you who have been a part of this with us, who are supporting this music by finding the album and being a part of this experience. Music isn't an isolated thing. It needs to breathe and live in community. So thank you for being a part of that community.
Yes, and of course all the participants, we already mentioned them, but it doesn't hurt to mention them again. Mark Doughton and Casper Abbo, our engineers.
Absolutely.
Philip Hoke and Don Franson, who brought the project to us, and Philip played on 2 movements.
Absolutely.
And of course also the church pastors and the staff who are really getting behind this, and taking pride that they enabled us to do this
Yes.
by giving us use of this space.
And David Saldana, who's behind the scenes right now filming us. Thank you,
David Saldana, without whom nothing would be happening.
Nothing would
right,
happen without
you know?
David Saldana, who also sings 2 of the solos on the album.
And
yes.
Oliver Nick Delgado, who is shepherding our publicity approach. And yeah, if you start mentioning people, there's always a danger of forgetting somebody. So fill in your name if you have not been mentioned.
We have to mention Frank.
We have to mention
Yes.
Frank.
The inimitable brother.
Frank
That's right.
Cassidy,
The brothers Cassidy.
who's been right with this project the whole time, making it happen, and took the beautiful photo that is the cover. And we didn't get to talk about that photo much, but I love that it's a picture of the organ, first of all. So he really puzzled over it for a long time. How do we capture this project through an image? And he got up on the organ, he took this beautiful photo, and he pulled out the Vox Humana stop, which I think is this beautiful metaphor for what we experienced with this piece. It is the human voice in a contained space released. And that's, the organ is the human voice too, because you're playing it. So I love all of the layers that come from that image. Frank really
It's
did
a very apt metaphor.
That was inspired. And maybe one of the reasons why you should actually get the CD, because then you have that picture as a hard copy, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And inside the CD is our new translation of the Mass that you can read and explore and use to ask questions and enjoy the music with too. So lots of things to talk about. Let's end it with that question. What do you hope to see this piece do in the future?
Well, you know, this piece belongs to this time and place. The fact that it happened during this pandemic and here in Los Angeles. And I think in the future, I think people will associate it with this because the pandemic will be something that people will talk about in the future, like we talk about the Spanish flu. And it's kind of appropriate and another metaphor for healing, isn't it, really? And that would be a nice thing.
Yes, so initially I want people to hear this exact album, so people listen to it in case I haven't said that before. I want us to do it again, and once again we're going to do selected movements this coming Sunday, next Sunday. I'm going to meditate on 3 movements in the Prelude concert, and we're singing the first single again, the Sanctus. I would love for us to do it at other places. We're doing it here in February. If there will be opportunities to take our show, the Holy Show, elsewhere, that would be great. But of course, also other people, people who listen to this album and say, hey, I want to do this at our church with the people who are there. That would make me happy too, if this album helps generate these kind of performances. And then of course, like I said, if somebody does it in 50 years and maybe checks out our album as a reference, this was the original one.
What did Bull and Harris do? Let's check.
Well, and that reminds me of, there's that wonderful Whitman poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he's basically on a ferry going across from Manhattan to Brooklyn. And he stands there and he sees all the ghosts of people who are going to come 100 years hence. And he's trying to describe their experience and what they'll remember of his moment crossing the Brooklyn Ferry. That ferry doesn't exist anymore. We don't cross that river in that way anymore. We have all these other modes of transport, but in that moment you see him in these multiple moments of time, kind of transcended by ghosts of the past and the present. It's just a beautiful moment, just like what you're saying, Christoph. Like, this document is something that other people can live with as well, and will live with. And they'll see in it, like Patrick, they'll hear the pandemic through this recording in ways that we can't because we're right in the middle of it. And I do think that's a beautiful thought, that is what artistry does. It reaches across time and across humanity, and it says, we're all in this together. If whatever compassion I can share, let me share with you through this art. Whatever healing you might can find, or enthusiasm, or connection, this is for you, so that you can then offer that to somebody else. And I do love that image. Christoph, thank you for saying that, and Patrick as well. I guess for me, to build on that, I've said that I think this piece will enter the choral canon sooner than later, and I'm just excited by the idea of being at an ACDA conference or chatting with my friends, my choral friends in other parts of the world, in 20, 50 years or whatever, and them asking, hey, have you done the Cassidy Mass? And me saying, well, actually, yeah, I had a really nice relationship with that, with Patrick and with the piece. And to be at a place where people don't realize it was us who started here, but they love it so much they're about to do it again. I'm excited for that moment sometime in my life. So,
Amen to all that.
Amen.
and with that, we will wrap up our 3 conversation series with Patrick Cassidy and conversations with composers. I think we'll be coming back to this conversation idea with other composers later. And Patrick, thank you so much for helping us launch so many things here at First Church. Thank you for being a part of this community, and mostly thank you for your incredibly beautiful and moving music.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to fist bump it out. Thank you, Christoph. That's it. All right. Thank you all. We will see you at the next one, and hopefully this Sunday. Come and join us live if you can.